Hey, everybody, welcome back once again to Retro Wrestling. I'm your host, Gene Jackson, and I have been excited about this episode for a while. I have found a guest that really encapsulates everything that retro wrestling is to me and retro in general is to me. Like I say, I've been looking for this for a while, so we're not going to waste any more time. So I want to welcome my guest right now. He's the host of We're Living in the 1980s. He has his own self-titled YouTube show, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little more. But welcome him right now, the neon icon himself, Smash Ventura.
Hey! I was just showing the guns, Daddy.
I was saying, yeah, the gun's out, man. We're
Yes,
coming in
sir.
hot.
We got a free ticket to the gun show, baby. I brought both of them. They're loaded.
There we go. That's how you lock them into the show right there, brother.
That's right, brother. You lock it in and you say MTV 3 times and you can be there. You can be there. Gene, brother, thank you so much for inviting me on your show. This is going to sound cliche and cheesy, but brother, I am excited to be on this show and I really appreciate the invite.
Well, man, I'm excited to have you. I turned 47 in July, so I grew up in the 80s and partially the 90s. Mm-hmm. And I was always a fan of it, but I know I'm sure you get this from a lot of people probably, but during the pandemic, the business I worked for closed and they couldn't tell me when they were going to put me back to work. So I had to go home. I found a work from home job doing tech support over the phone for AT&T customers.
Wow.
And so had a sweet shift, man, 6 a.m. to 3 p.m. And the rest of the time was mine. But oddly, during that time, my wife was having to work 2 hours away throughout the week, Monday through Thursday. So she would be gone throughout the week. And it's just me and 2 cats after 3 o'clock every day. And man, we started binging 80s movies, 80s TV, obviously 80s wrestling. And I'll tell you, what one of my favorite things to do was, and I still find myself getting caught in, down these rabbit holes today. I would get on YouTube and go to these 80s TV commercial compilations.
Yes.
And sit and watch those for hours. I don't know that I've really admitted to that publicly, but I thought maybe if anybody could understand and appreciate that, Smash Ventura would.
I definitely do, and I'll tell you that I'm just as bad as you are because I've been saving those compilations for years and years and years because one side project that I have is recreating 80s cable.
Yes.
And to do that, just a quick short story is I have to rebuild each one of my favorite channels I used to watch, which requires not only a bunch of 80s commercials, but the station IDs and the bumpers and the station particular promos. And the only channel I have fully rebuilt that I've been able to purchased DVD shows into and then put the commercials in is 80s Nick at Night, baby.
Oh, wow. Yes.
So I'm a maniac, man. You're telling me, okay, don't think I'm weird because I'm watching 80s commercials. I'm like, brother, hold my high C.
Oh, that's awesome, man. Yeah, man, it gives me, yeah, and it's funny because like back in those days, you're like, oh, these freaking commercials. If only there was some sort of contraption we had where we could record this and get past them. And now, man, they give me such a warm and fuzzy feeling inside and bring back. It's crazy, man. The nostalgia and the memories that spring to mind watching all that stuff, man. Those movies, the TV, and 80s nostalgia has been big in recent years. But man, one thing I wanted to ask you about. Do you think it's even possible? Because like I talk to people in their 20s and even their early 30s, and they tell me, "Oh yeah, man, I like all that old 80s stuff. You know, I watched this and I watched Top Gun, and I played the Nintendo emulator." And I don't think it's. I've told my wife this a lot, because we're the same. We're within a year the same age, and I'm like, I don't think people of that age can truly understand and appreciate the 80s. I mean, sure, go back and watch it. That's all you can really do, but you cannot appreciate a time if you didn't live it when there wasn't internet, there wasn't cell phones. If I
Preach
wanted
it.
to watch a movie, I either had
Yep.
to go to the theater or I had to drive down to the video store, cross my fingers, and hope that the movie I want to see is there.
Testify, brother.
Nintendo games, like, man, I mean, I'm glad they have an interest in it. I'm glad they like it. But if you didn't live it, you really just cannot understand and appreciate what it was like.
Yeah, no, I that is so well said, Gene. And I got to tell you that my audience, I'm so flattered to even say I have an audience, but they come in three batches. One, people in our demographic. How I'm just a smidge more popular with the ladies, I don't know. Maybe it's the hair. Maybe it's the flair. Woo! But another pocket is 90s babies who missed the 80s because they were too small to
Right.
recall it. But there's something about it. And when I say 90s babies, I'm meaning people who were 6 years old by the time 96 rolled around. So the early 90s, I've always had this philosophy, and please, tell me if you agree, but I've always felt like the pop culture of each decade, especially the era that we've lived in, bled into the next decade by a couple of years before that following decade found its own identity. By about 2 or 3 years, I think. What do you think on that?
Oh, I think that's 100% spot on, because if you go back to 1980 and even into 81,
yes,
it's still inspired by the 70s.
Oh yeah, there's still bell bottoms.
You go to 89 into 90 and maybe almost 91. There's still an 80s vibe there for sure.
Heck, man, I'd even say 93,
Yeah.
early mid 93. But so with that being said, the second batch is 90s babies who kind of feel like they have an attachment to the 80s because they got to experience the kind of waning part of it before before the 90s found itself. So that batch likes to visit the show to try and get an essence of what it was at its peak and in its prime. The third group I deal with surprises the heck out of me. And this is both with the radio show and the YouTube show. Children. My youngest viewer is and listener is 11 years old.
Oh, wow.
And she's a bright, brilliant little girl out of Ohio. And for some reason, she's interested in previous eras. She's a big fan of the 50s, the pop culture of the 50s. She likes stuff from the 70s. And she's absolutely fascinated with the 80s. And she found me first and then told her parents, and the three of them watch and listen.
Wow, that's awesome, man.
I mean, what? And of course, really when her parents reached out to me, her mom's like, when you played that Rainbow Bright commercial, oh, I remember Christmas morning, 1984. Me and she told this huge, great story. And the husband, he mentioned a break I did on the radio show where he's like, yeah, when you were going into Phil Collins' Abacab, most DJs would have just, said the guy in the song, but you're like, okay, boys and girls, get ready. Coming up, Abacab Confessions with Phil Collins. Stay on key. And he's like, dude, so it's great. And it's I'm honored that an entire family discovered me thanks to a little girl who did not have any clue about the 80s other than she liked it. And to go back to your point, I think people that want to experience it, they tune into shows like ours because they want to try and get that feel. But I do agree with you that while they want to get that feel, they'd have to be there to understand the excitement of seeing a Saturday night's main event advertised in a TV guide, or having to wait until Saturday morning for Muppet Babies. But there is a batch of them that are like, I want to feel that as best I can. And so that gives you and I a great platform to try and bring them back.
And I certainly appreciate that. Like, I hope that doesn't come off wrong when I say that, like I'm knocking them, like you could never experience it like we did, so stop trying. But
no.
I think that's really cool that there's especially somebody that young. That's amazing to me. But they haven't lived in a world when there hasn't been cell phones, there hasn't been internet, there hasn't been 200, 400, 500 channels on the TV.
Right.
When you can't just get a notion to watch and listen to, like, you remember, like, so back when we were kids, man, if a cool song came out, if I didn't want to go buy the whole album, I had to sit and listen to the radio until that song come on. Click
Yes.
record.
Yes.
Hope the DJ didn't talk over the beginning or the end of it. And there's certain songs to this day, like when it gets towards the end of the song, I'm expecting to go 5 minutes past the hour here at Rock 101.5, because for years that's how I always heard that song, you know. So it's just kind of ingrained in me. That's part of it, you know.
I didn't mind so much when it was Wolfman Jack, because I mean, obviously I'm not going to throw myself under a bus because I like talking over songs, but I'm totally with you, man. You know, you'd sit by there with the boombox, just
yep, like, oh, there it is, click. And then if they talked over too much, we're like, all right, we got to get that one again. He took out the whole last 40 seconds of that one.
And am I right? Sometimes we'd be sitting there for an hour or two before that song came back in rotation.
Oh yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. And you know, it's funny because like in this, like I say, this era, people can't even really, even people our age, you get spoiled to it. You don't remember what it was like to be like simple things like, if I'm sitting here and I go, I wonder, you know, just pick anything, you know, any random fact I need to know, I can pick my phone up and Google and have the equivalent of an encyclopedia or a dictionary or whatever. But when you're a kid, when we were 8 years old, like, hey, I wonder about this. If my parents can't answer that question, I got to wait till I go to school the next day, go to the library, go to the encyclopedias and look that up.
Yeah,
you know, I mean,
totally agree, man. These kids with these phones can do stuff I would have never even. I thought I was like top notch when I took the Indiana and Jones and Star Wars figures out to the backyard and made like this elaborate trap with like sticks and rocks. And okay, Luke Skywalker's going to accidentally kick the stick and the rocks are going to come down. Then He-Man has to get involved. I thought I was like really acing it, man.
That's right.
That was some Stone Age smurfing, baby.
And man, and here's another one, like somebody the age of that young lady that's listening to your show at 11 can't comprehend. She's never experienced this. Okay. We go to a concert, we go to the amusement park, or we're just with our friends outside and we snap a group picture together. Yes. Now we got to wait a week to 2 weeks until this thing goes and gets developed and come back to find out, oh crap, my eyes were closed. You know, now we can stand there and take 6 different versions of it till we get it right. But back in them days, again, cross your fingers and hope for the best.
Well, folks, I'm going to tell you, Gene and I'm going to be turning Gene's age at the end of the year. So Gene and I are like perfectly synced for this conversation. People younger than us, even by 5 years, don't remember the freaking photomat where you drove to a small little building and there was a little person in there and you dropped off your film and you went over to the mall and it would be done in 15 minutes to a half hour. And then you discover, oh yeah, my eyes are closed, or the flash was too big, or, you know, you got me thinking too, man. Speaking of malls, so nowadays, the kids, not all of them, but some of them, if especially with the classic wrestling guys, like the youngsters getting involved, they're like, oh, well, the likeness is off because this one has wristbands and so didn't wear wristbands. Let me tell you guys something. I don't want to sound like the guy on the porch, but I think Gene's going to back me up on this. Thank you for showing that, Gene. I was just going to tell a King Kong Bundy story.
I had this one in the holster. I felt like we might get here.
You know, I'm going to be checking my shower for cameras, man. What I do with my Smurf is my business. So let's just make sure this is just a friendship, buddy. But so when King Kong Bundy attacked Hulk Hogan on Saturday, or not Saturday night's main event, sorry. Yeah, it was Saturday night's main event. He was going against Morocco. It was the way they did it. It was like the Lincoln assassination. How dare somebody attack Hulk Hogan? And of course, the next day, me and everybody I knew at school were like, so you getting the Bundy figure when it comes out? It's like, yeah, but he never showed up for the longest time. And then when he finally showed up, I guarantee you, me included, nobody at KB's was like, yeah, but he's got wristbands on and he didn't wear wristbands. So I'm just, now see that one there. I did get the one without the wristbands, but apparently there was a variant with wristbands.
And that one's got it on. It's kind of hard to tell. If you're watching the video cast of this, if you're just listening, I've got a picture of the back of a LJN box, and so we've got Bundy with his wristbands on, and to your point, like Mr. Wonderful, who was a muscular man, but in these figures, you look at Hulk Hogan, who looks almost anorexic in his figure, next to Mr. Wonderful, who looks like the most he looks like Sid Vicious.
Yes, and he's tall.
The likenesses are very, very questionable back then. But man, we didn't care, man. I was getting them every time they came in. I got them. And let me tell you something else about that King Kong Bundy. You could have committed murder with that King Kong Bundy if you got in a tough situation and need to fight your way out of it. That King Kong Bundy had some weight to it. That was a big chunk of rubber right there. You could have knocked somebody silly with that thing if you had.
Brother, I think you're in my head. Because I did fight off a bully with that King Kong Bundy. So long story short, there was a guy picking on me because I liked wrestling. Wrestling is fake. Even as a kid, here's how I saw wrestling. What they did on TV looked like it hurt. But to me, it was like a live action movie. Now, no one goes to see Rocky IV and shouts out like an idiot in the middle of the movie theater, well, Drago's not a Russian. Dude, shut up. Sit down. He's actually Swedish. No one does that. They go to the Rocky IV movie to enjoy the Rocky IV movie with the characters. So that's how I saw wrestling. But this guy just wouldn't let up. And of course, he was in a grade or two higher than me. And he's like, if I see you bring that Bundy figure to recess again, I'm going to take him. And I'm like, no, you're not. And so he came up to me, and I had the Bundy as Gene shows in the picture there. Just a big ball of rubber, folks. Just a big, heavy ball of rubber. And I had the feet in between my fingers, and I had my fist clenched. So I had him down by me, and he comes over and he thinks he's going to take my Big John Studd and Hogan too. While I flap him upside the face with that Bundy, I knocked out one of his teeth. Now, he never picked on me again, but the principal said, now Smash, if you're going to bring your wrestlers to school, we can't have you beating up on people with them. And I'm like, he came to me, baby. I told him, there's an avalanche.
I thought those wrestlers were fake, but that dude's missing a tooth to explain that.
And that was my rib on him for the rest of the year, because he did leave me alone. But every time I saw him, and for the folks listening, I'm motioning to my mouth with my hand, like ow, ow. So every time I saw him, I'm like, ooh, ah, ah.
So as I sit here talking to you right now, I live in the state of Alabama, but I grew up in Mississippi. Nice. So you can only imagine what I had to hear from the people who, hey, wrestling's fake. And I'm like, they sound like, but anyway, that's a whole nother podcast. But,
we have that in here in Vermont too, Gene. It's not too much different. It's just a little more, hey, Bill.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, oh, I'm sorry, that wrestling's too lowbrow for you, buddy. I mean, you seem like you're watching Masterpiece Theater, I'm sure, when you get home tonight. And,
right. I mean, it's chess. Like, okay, just leave the kids alone. They're enjoying it. Like, no one said, okay, Muppet Babies is fake.
To me, I took the same approach you did, and I'm like, nobody's saying Rocky's fake, but then again, Hulk Hogan and King Kong Bundy don't get to do 10 takes of this.
Right.
And we don't get to have Hogan stand on a crate to where he doesn't look smaller than Andre, and all the stuff that goes into these movies to make them, appear to be what they are. They're out there doing this stuff in one take in most cases. Some of that stuff's taped, but they still have to do it in front of a live audience.
And the pain they suffer from performing is real. I mean, both of us have had stints in wrestling, me just doing the announcing, but I have all the respect in the world for all the gentlemen that go in there and take bumps, because you can blow out a knee, you suffer whiplash in the neck, hitting those ropes. You can really screw yourself up if you don't know how. And I know I took a power bomb in the ring once from a good friend. He took care of me. But it's for those who don't know, it's like Gene, feel free to jump in. It feels like getting hit by a bus. I mean, or a lesser bus. You don't break any ribs or anything generally when you're just doing, basic bumps, but the wind gets knocked out of you over and over and over again. And the guys that built up a tolerance to that, nothing but love for you guys.
I mean, different rings are different as far as the level of padding, but I mean, they're all steel frames with, 4x4s, and then plywood laid over that. And sometimes there's a piece of film this thick, maybe it's that thick, and then over time it wears down, so it always ends up this thick. And yeah, man, it's those guys take falls and land. There's people who fall to the equivalent of what they do in one match, and they don't work the rest of their lives. You know what I mean? They're considered disabled, and these guys have the equivalent of the impact on their body is equivalent of a small automobile accident almost every night.
Said.
You know,
well said. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, if you don't respect what they do, you don't understand what they do. But
Gene put it way better than me. You nailed it on the head, brother. It's like getting into a small accident like a dozen times every night.
Yeah, it really is. And these poor guys, like I go to these wrestling conventions, and I remember going and seeing like Ivan Koloff, and man, he's hunched over, he can't stand up straight, and he's using a walker, and he's barely getting around. And I told my wife, I was like, look at poor Ivan Koloff over there. I'm like, he never did a swanton off the top of a Hell in a Cell. He never did a ladder match. Like, what is going to become of these guys when they get to be, if they get to be Ivan's age? What's going to happen? You know, and
yeah, no, it's an excellent point. Although I think even though the guys like in Bruno's day and a little further on didn't do quite the aerial stuff that the later guys did, those rings were as far as like guys like Bruno and Billy Graham and those guys have said, you know, those rings were more like boxing rings.
Oh yeah.
So they had even less give. And it's funny. I remember Undertaker at some point recently said, yeah, when Vince started getting in there and taking bumps, they made the ring a little softer. And I'm like, oh, I see.
Exactly. Foley's like, yeah, when I went through the top of that Hell in the Cell, it was still the old ring. And he's like, you know, getting thrown off the top into the announce table was easier than taking that flat back bump into the ring through the top, which is crazy to think about, but I get it. It makes sense, honestly. But yeah, and those guys did it every night, a lot of them, and multiple times on the weekends. Where you know these guys now, and not to turn this into back in these guys now. But I mean, a lot of them, they only work once or twice a week, if that, because they don't tour like they used to. So even if they are taking bigger bumps, it's on softer rings and not as often. So
I mean, they realize we got to take better care of the talent. In more modern terms, the ECW guys, they left everything out there, but their style aged them so quickly. So I mean, unfortunately, for the folks that like ECW, those guys did so much crazy stuff that no one stopped to think, okay, we're building these characters that can draw money. Let's draw money for a long time. Arn Anderson's a good example of somebody that he didn't have to go out there and do anything crazy. He was Arn Anderson. You could draw money with Arn Anderson for an extended period of time just by him going out there and doing wrestling.
Yeah, that's a good point. Now, you've already mentioned this a couple of times, so I kind of feel like what your answer is going to be, but I have to ask. So if somebody comes to you and like Smash, 80s wrestling, what's the very first image that pops in your head when you hear 80s wrestling?
The rock and wrestling era, Hulk Hogan.
So you got guys like this in your head.
Yes, sir.
You've got things like Cyndi Lauper.
Cyndi Lauper, yep.
And of course,
that rock and wrestling era for sure.
WrestleMania, Mr. T. I mean, who's more 80s than Mr. T, right? I mean,
right.
He was out there pitying fools.
I loved the A-Team, but they couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. I loved, it was meant for kids to enjoy, so they couldn't like kill the bad guys. But I used to think in school, it's like, okay, I've got a handful of rocks to throw at the bully, but I'll throw it at the ground all in front of you and you'll run away. And it didn't work that way.
Million rounds of bullets were fired on the A-Team and no one ever got hit.
Nobody ever got shot.
The only downside to me of having, I thought Mr. T was like the biggest, baddest dude in the world watching the A-Team until Hulk Hogan showed up on there, and you see that Hulk Hogan towers over Mr. T. And then when he gets in the ring at WrestleMania, even Mr. Wonderful and Piper are bigger than Mr. T. He looked like just the smallest dude ever.
I
help his image.
I'm with you, Gene. I was shocked, and of course, I was expecting Clubber Lang, which we did get the Clubber Lang persona, but it's like wait, he's like a normal guy next to the wrestlers.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought I had watched Rocky 3 so many times that tape was worn out. I mean, I loved Clubber Lang. I loved Hogan being Thunderlips and, calling Stallone a meatball and it's all fake meatball. It's all fake. But Stallone had a great respect for the wrestlers. He tells a story many years later. I think it was a few months before he inducted Hulk into the Hall of Fame. He said, yeah, there were some people on the crew that, were respectful to Terry to his face, but he'd walk by the concessions. And one day I caught a few of them. Yeah, he's a big, dumb wrestler. And this, as Stallone tells it, he went right over and he goes, you guys get to do this take after take after take, referencing like what you had mentioned earlier. He goes, that guy right there is a live action stunt man. Show that man some respect because he only gets one time to get it right live, and he does that every night.
Absolutely. Yeah, Stallone had a lot of respect for wrestlers. I was really impressed when Terry Funk passed away a couple of years ago. Ooh. Stallone put out a statement and was really said some really nice things about Terry, and of course helped Terry get jobs out in Hollywood and did a lot for his career. So
Terry was so awesome. Like, if I could stray just a minute, there's a couple of movies that he wasn't the main character, but Funk added so much greatness to it. First off, in reference to Stallone, Over the Top.
Yes.
The arm wrestling classic. I don't care what anyone says. I love Bull Hurley. I love Lincoln Hawk. I love the story of trying to prove that he's not a loser and win back the love of his kid. He's a truck driver. And I remember when he goes to see the evil grandfather who's trying to adopt the grandson so that Stallone can't see him anymore. And he goes up to the penthouse in between tournament matches, and he realizes this conversation isn't going anywhere. So he gets up to leave, and he goes, when I'm done, I'm coming back to get him. And all of a sudden, Terry Funk stands in front of him, blocking his way out. And he just simply puts his two fingers on Stallone's shoulder, and he goes, Mr. Cutler isn't finished talking to you. And Stallone's like, well, I'm finished talking. And then Terry gives him a little shove, and then he knocks him through the friggin' door. So I'm like, that is so Terry Funk.
Yes.
Or like Roadhouse, when Patrick Swayze walks by him and he's like, I hear you got balls big enough to fill a dump truck, but you don't look like much to me, boy.
Exactly. I mean, that's stuff you would have heard Terry say on Saturday night's main event or the NWA Power Hour. Like, that was just Terry Funk right there.
That reminds me, Gene. I'm sorry, I have to ask you this question while I'm thinking of it. Did you ever watch the show Quantum Leap?
Yes.
Okay,
I know exactly what you're about to reference to.
Yeah, okay.
Please bring it on.
Bring it on, Daddy.
Yes.
Terry, an episode where Scott Bakula's character Sam Beckett leaps into a Russian wrestling character, and the guy that he's fighting is Terry freaking Funk. There's this great scene where he had this wife that was flirting with all the guys, and she wanted Scott Bakula bad. And they're in the locker room, and I can tell Gene's like, oh, my neck's hurting from nodding so much. But she's flirting with him, and all of a sudden Terry Funk comes in, and he's like, you wouldn't be trying to wrestle my wife, would you, boy? And he pulls the locker door off, and he smashes it over his own head, bending it, and then he hands it to Scott Bakula, and then he's like, nice talking with you, Mr. Shiloh. Watch your step, Pee-wee. I'd hate to have to break you in half.
Man, I loved that show, but I never looked forward to an episode more than when I realized, oh God, Terry Funk's going to be on here next week. This is amazing.
Oh, it was so good.
Absolutely.
and props to Scott Bakula for getting all those bumps, pile drivers, and God, Terry Funk put him through the ringer.
He sure did. But yeah, that was a great 80s show, and the two movies you referenced, Roadhouse and Over the Top. Those are definitely movies I revisited during my binging of 80s movies.
How could you not?
That time, because such good stuff. I love Roadhouse. Like I have lived my life by the credo: be nice until it's time not to be nice. As a manager in retail over the years, I have quoted that so many times. I can't tell you.
Good God, man. Yes, absolutely.
But you brought it up earlier, and to me, one of the things I think of if I think of 80s wrestling is always Saturday night's main event.
Right.
And man, you said something that really struck a chord with me earlier. I can remember like just watching some random TV show on NBC during the week. Like my mom would be watching something. I'm not even really paying attention to it. I'm just in the room, and all of a sudden, Saturday night, me and Mr. T. And I'm like, oh, there's one this Saturday night. Oh my God. And man, I'm just psyched. And then I could not wait until Saturday night when Saturday night's main event hit. And I to this day, I go back and watch those. I love those shows, man.
Yeah. I mean, I got to say, I love those shows also. The fire and the emotion and a little sidebar story. So another friend's podcast I appeared on, I offered to do a promo for. They were going to have me and a lady who also was a wrestling manager, and I go, why don't I give you guys like a Saturday night main event style kind of promo? I'll have like the epic
Say, man, that music in the background, that's
yeah. And they God love them, they all were like, my God, Smash, you nailed it, because I put my logo right over my shoulder and I'm standing in front of nothing but black screen, the shoulders over my logo, and after the explosions with their logo, all of a sudden I come in and I'm like, this Friday night on the Friday Night Podcast, it's going to be the man of Twisted Steel and Instant Oatmeal, Smash Ventura live, brother.
That is awesome.
And that was just off the top of my head, but they were all like, Twisted I thought you were going to say sex appeal, but you said Instant Oatmeal. I'm like, hey, I'm an original, baby.
There you go.
But yeah,
take you over here, and then we go over there. That's
that show had such great energy, and the opening, even the promo that they would tease you with, like you mentioned, you got so excited, like even if you weren't paying attention, all of a sudden tonight or Saturday on Saturday night's main event, Mr. Wonderful is taking the title. That's right, Hogan. It's all over for you. Wait, what happened? When's it on?
Yeah. But man, that little music they had in the background built the tension, and it was perfect. But like you said, man, you'd be sitting there watching Quantum Leap, or mom's watching some show I don't even care about, and all of a sudden, oh yeah, Saturday night's main event, Jake the Snake, I'm coming for you, brother. And I'm like, oh yes.
You're not kidding. One time I was visiting my grandmother, and she loved In the Heat of the Night.
But I love it now, just I guess because of the great memories it gives me. I love that show. Plus, I was in Mississippi, so I can relate.
Brother, I agree with you. It's a great show, but man, it had one of the best opening theme songs ever. That bluesy, in the heat of the night. But she's watching that, and then all of a sudden it goes to a commercial, and that music comes on. And it's like, I'm Jake the Snake Roberts, and this Saturday night, me and Damien are going to squeeze the juice out of that little Hawaiian. Tune in and find out. It's like, wait, what?
Yes. Yeah, you don't expect to go from Chief Archie to freaking Jake the Snake and Damien on your screen. But there you are,
We'll return after these messages.
Hey everybody, Gene Jackson here, inviting you to check out the Retro Wrestling Review, where each week I'm joined by some great co-hosts who help me review classic episodes of USWA Championship Wrestling, and right now we are doing week-by-week reviews of 1993. But we don't just do reviews, sometimes we get a chance to interview some of the people who were there and lived it, plus do watch-alongs. It's a lot of fun, so check out new episodes that drop every Wednesday at WrestleCopia.com. And to find links to everything associated to the podcast, you can go to uswapodcast.com.
Hey guys, Ray Russell here, curator of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, inviting you guys to listen to many of the programs here as part of the WrestleCopia brand, including, but not limited to, the Wrestling Memory Grenade, currently covering the 1988 and the WWF project. You can also listen to the Regional Wrestling Podcast, where we talk the territories, whether it's Jamie Ward with Georgia 81, Roman Gomez with the UWF in 1986, or Gene Jackson covering Memphis in 85. 3 projects going on right now over there at Regional Wrestling. You can also listen to the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. Bob goes back in time each and every week, covering not just his career, but countless stories and interactions with hundreds of wrestling names spanning his 2 decades in the business. But that's not all. You can also check out the Puro Wrestling Academy with the professor of Puro Resu, Mr. Dan Ginnity. Dan and I go back in time and cover the history of Japanese professional wrestling in the English language. And you can listen to all of those shows and more, all part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, located over at WrestleCopia.com. That's WrestleCopia.com, and anywhere your podcast streaming needs are met, from Apple to Spotify, Pocket Cast, and beyond. And while you're at it, why not subscribe to our social media guys for all the latest goings on here at the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Plus, I'm constantly adding old school video clips and pictures from throughout wrestling history. You can follow us over on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. And why not subscribe to YouTube.com/Wrestling Grenade. So if you're looking to support that next up-and-coming podcast brand, please consider making it WrestleCopia.
I'm glad you mentioned that one because, dude, Saturday night's main event, I'll never forget the feeling I had when Jake DDT'd Steamboat on that floor.
Oh.
It looked like it killed him. And then years later, you find out it really dang near did. You know, they said he really hit the concrete. He really had this big hematoma on his head and had to lay out for a little while. And
Jake tried to tell them. He tried, all these shoot interviews years later, we're finding out all the details. Jake's like, they asked me to do it. And I'm like, I can't guarantee his safety. His head's exposed. Yeah, right. Oh, well, I remember we're going into the early 90s a little bit, but I remember when he showed up, Jake the Snake showed up in WCW, and of course they booked him against Sting immediately. And it seemed to me, even with the problems Jake was dealing with behind the scenes, his promos just kept getting better and better because he's standing there with Jim Ross, and Jim Ross like, well, Sting's regarded as a hero amongst the children, and he stands atop a box above everyone else. And Jake the Snake is listening, and he's just kind of, looking at Jim Ross like you're a disgusting person. And all of a sudden he goes, oh yeah, Sting, my man, you stand atop that box and the little kids wave and they paint their faces. But I'm going to tell you something about me, man. You've never dealt with anybody like me. Stand on your box. But I'm the kind of guy that will come along and kick it out from underneath your feet and watch your feet dangle and sway back and forth within the Everest of reality. Trust me.
And you're like, geez, that's pretty heavy for a Saturday night at 5:30, dude. Like, what are we doing?
I mean, it was so epic. And you're right, back to Saturday night's main event, you're watching TV and all of a sudden the music kicks on. It's like, oh yes, this Saturday I'm gonna take on that hairy bozo Georgie Animal Steel. Yeah. And you know what would happen if he gives Elizabeth a flower, right? You wouldn't do that, would you? Yeah. Ha. It's like, holy crap.
And then you get the counterpoint to that. The next commercial, like, George,
Macho. That you got me thinking, brother. I remember the first time George did an interview, and of course, I'm still a mark at that point. I'm like, okay, well, it'll be interesting to hear how he actually talks. And he first starts. The guy asks him, "So, what would you like to say to your fans?" All these years later, and he's like, I enjoyed professional wrestling, and I used breath mints to change my tongue green. I'm like, wait a minute, he's speaking the King's English. He almost sounds Shakespearean. What?
The only time they tease that, and I didn't see it in real time, but I saw it on a Coliseum video later on that I rented. They did this bit on TNT. I don't know if you ever saw it, where manager, where the psychiatrist hooked him to the machine, and oh no, bro, no.
Yes.
He goes back to being crazy at the end. It's like, hey, wait a minute.
I'm same with you, brother. I didn't see that till after the fact, and I know I'm sidebarring a little bit, but when they did the Ed Wood movie, George the Animal Steel was born to play Tor Johnson.
Yes,
they just did a touch of makeup on him, and it's like done.
Yeah, like that's all we needed, really, and that's just for the lights.
Right? I mean, God works in funny ways sometimes, because it's like, okay, who do we? I can imagine Tim Burton and the guys. Okay, well, who do we got our other characters, but who do we get to play Tor Johnson? And somebody in the room was smart enough to go, oh, George the Animal Steel, he's a perfect likeness. Wait, there's a guy that looks like Tor Johnson walking around? Well, yeah, as a matter of fact, there is.
Bless his heart, but hey, that's good for us.
Right? Oh man, but I'm sidebarring.
those shoot reviews, getting to hear George Steele talk in his regular voice was fascinating. And even though I had read up and knew that Nikita Koloff was really Scott Simpson from Minnesota, the first time I saw one of those and he just talked completely in his normal voice, I was like, and he's like, oh yeah, Rob, when I first became Nikita Koloff, I'm like, he's got a radio DJ voice. Like, what?
Dude, I totally agree with you. The first time we might have saw the same one, I don't know, but so him and Ivan are sitting getting ready for a shoot interview, and Nikita starts out with the Nikita talk, and then he's like, actually, I'm really honored that the fans remember me. And Ivan's reacting like, what's going on here? And then, and then Nikita starts chuckling. I'm like, okay, what's going on? And the interviewer goes, Ivan, and Ivan goes, I am shocked that all these years, nephew Nikita be lying to me. And how dare you? How and Nikita's chuckling, and then all of a sudden Ivan's like, yeah, so it was a lot of fun to work together. And I'm like,
it was really fun, eh? I'm French Canadian, eh? Like, what?
What's going on here?
Hey, you got a hammer and sickle tattooed on your arm, and you're French Canadian? Like, that's dedication, brother.
Oh yeah, I mean those guys, they took it so seriously, and I think just I know I sidebar, but we're at that age now. It happens in the foliage of life, but it's harder to do the kayfabe thing nowadays and suspend reality, because one minute these guys are fighting on TV and the next they're praising each other on social media, and it's like, I get that it's a movie, but again, using the Rocky IV reference, I wouldn't be able to. Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't be able to invest the same way if like Drago went on there and was like, yeah, Stallone, I'm honored to work with him and whatnot. It's like, no, stay apart until the movie's over.
Yeah. Yeah, I get it. Everybody knows now, but wrestling's still a different animal. And like, I don't need to see pictures of these guys in this heated feud that, that one tried to murder the other one on Monday night. And then there's pictures of them, I for instance, like I remember right after Braun Strowman had like flipped a bus over or an ambulance over on top of Roman Reigns or something and tried to kill him or whatever. And then they went on some foreign tour and people had pictures of them like standing together, looking at like ancient ruins together, like 3 days later. And I'm like, come on, man. Don't do this to us.
Work with us a little bit. You got me thinking though. We talked about Saturday night's main event. Now I also was a gigantic fan of Clash of the Champions.
Oh my gosh, man. Yes. A big wrestling show during the week. Oh, sign me up, dude. That was, those are, to this day, like still, like if I'm just want to watch some random wrestling show, I'll just pick up some random Clash of the Champions. And now I've seen them all so many times. It's getting harder to pick one out that I hadn't seen in the last, year or two. But, yeah. If you set me down, cause I've got, oh my gosh, literally thousands of wrestling DVDs and a ton of VHS. Like if I could turn this camera around, I've got a whole rack of those big clamshell Coliseum videos.
Oh, that's beautiful.
It took me years to do it. I finally got every last one of those. And,
that is awesome.
Like my pride and joy.
Yeah.
But it gun to my head, if you told me like you've got to get rid of your entire wrestling collection, you can keep one thing, it would be automatically narrowed down between Clash of the Champions and Saturday Night's Main Event. And I guess I'd have to flip a coin between the two because it would be a tough call.
Yeah. And the great thing about those shows and people that did not live in that era don't understand this is that we were used to seeing enhancement matches on TV. And I don't like to call the gentleman who would make the superstars look good jobbers. That seems a little derogatory. I like to call them enhancement guys because they did, guys like Barry Horowitz and Brooklyn Brawler, they did a wonderful job with having to make all these different people look good and whatnot. So I think there should be an enhancement talent segment of the Hall of Fame, to be honest. But so that in the 80s especially, that's what we were used to, folks. We saw mostly enhancement matches, and then like maybe one superstar versus a superstar at the end of, say, a primetime wrestling or a WCW Saturday night, or as it was, back then, World Championship Wrestling, but under the NWA auspicious. So Clash of Champions and Saturday Night's Main Event to our generation, and Gene, jump in and back me up if you want, or knock me over with a big boot. Those two shows were like getting a pay-per-view quality program for free on TV, and that added to the anticipation and the excitement for our generation.
Definitely, because you could sit here and count on one hand how many times you saw Hulk Hogan wrestle on like Superstars of Wrestling or Primetime Wrestling or any of that. It just didn't happen.
Yeah.
So when he come out there on Saturday Night's Main Event, it was a big deal, because then you didn't have 12 pay-per-views a year. You had, when we started out, we just had WrestleMania.
Yeah.
And then we mixed in,
Survivor
Royal
Series
Rumble and Survivor
and
Series,
then Royal
and
Rumble,
SummerSlam, and so even at that rate, even at pay-per-views, you still weren't seeing him wrestle a lot. So it was a big deal to see Hogan and some of those guys on your TV for free. And then same with Ric Flair. Every once in a while, Ric Flair would go out there and have a competitive match with George South, and you're like, wait a minute. George South usually can't get the bat off his shoulder with half these guys.
Right. And I'm glad you brought that up, man, because that seemed to be the difference in the I remember Tully Blanchard and Arn Anderson talking about the NWA style and the WWF style. And when they got to WWF, the first few matches they had competitive matches with the enhancement talent. And Barry Darsow, as Arn Anderson tells the story, he's like, well, he pulled us aside and he goes, what are you guys doing? And Arn's like, well, what do you mean? He goes, that's not the WWF style. These guys are here to make you look good. Go out and squash them. Where like, geez, how many, and nothing against the Armstrongs, but how many weekends did the Horsemen make it seem like, oh, the Armstrongs might have them this time?
Yes. I mean, that was the deal, was like the Horsemen's heat was stemmed from, if they didn't cheat, if they didn't use the time limit to their advantage, any of these guys could have beat them at any given time. They just have the belt because of, through shady means. But especially like that was the one that always got me, was like Flair, on the rare occasion he would wrestle on like a Saturday night show.
Mm-hmm.
Like I say, you've seen either George South or Mike Jackson get just completely owned by just everybody up and down, from Nikita Koloff and the Road Warriors down to Shaska Watley and Lasertron or whatever.
Lasertron.
Ric Flair is over here doing the flip bump in the corner, running down the thing, getting press slammed off the top rope by George South, Mike Jackson. Yeah. And you're sitting there going, I'm fixing to see Ric Flair get beat by George freaking South. Like, what is happening right now? And then last second, he'd either pull out and either put his feet on the ropes, or he might actually win with a figure four, just to show you that, oh yeah, I guess a match really can end with Ric Flair putting on a figure four, because it surely wasn't going to happen in a big time match ever.
Right.
And Flair has said in interviews since then that guys would knock him and be like, dude, if you can barely beat George South, how are you a credible world champion? And Flair's defense was, hey, if they think that anybody at any time could beat me for that belt, then they know they better buy a ticket every time I come to town, because tonight's the night they might see Steve Armstrong win the world title.
Bingo.
So let's get out there. And I thought, man, that is some really solid logic right there. So
it is.
You can't argue it.
It is. And in fact, they realized very quickly with Hogan that, and Hogan in his own right, especially in his prime, was a giant man of his own, in the Stud and Andre range. I mean, Hogan was a big guy. But they realized by the time they got to WrestleMania 2, it's like, we better start stacking up on monsters to defeat him, because, even though Mr. Wonderful could surprise him, or Roddy Piper could surprise him, we built Hogan so big that we need to keep feeding him Godzillas and King Kongs. And so in that, you had Bundy and Kamala and One Man Gang and Killer Khan and whatnot. My dad and I used to have a joke back then that, okay, no matter what guy we see in what promotion, if they're over 6'7" and over 360 pounds, sooner or later, if they're any good, they're going to find themselves standing across the ring from Hogan. It's inevitable.
Even Jim Cornette's bodyguard will eventually put on a cop uniform and come wrestle Hogan in a cage and get superplexed off the top of the cage. Who would have bet on that one? Holy!
I'll tell you, and and feel free to jump in, man. When that happened, now again, folks, for those who did not live in the 80s, our houses were not decorated with neon lights and bright colors and whatnot. We had brown paneling, baby. brown, dark paneling in the front room with like a beige, dark, shaggy carpet, which carpets were comfortable to sit on back then, by the way, not to sound like the old guy here. But here we are all crowded in the front room. The old man's made pizza, which was a special event kind of thing. And we're watching that, and all of a sudden they're going up there, and I look at Dad and I go, "What are they doing?" And he's like, "Oh, this ain't gonna be good." And then they're working at it and getting in position, and I'm like, "No," almost like Cleveland, modern reference there. Cleveland, like, "No, no, 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 no." And they come off the top of the cage, and of course Vince and Jesse, perfect for that. McMahon's like, oh geez, Jesse, they're both out. Wow, McMahon, yeah, they're down. It's like, oh, holy mackerel.
Yes, that was crazy. You mentioned the wood paneling, and here's a little peek at how things changed quickly in the WWF, because, you know, it towards the later part of the 80s and definitely into like 1990, 91, you've seen things like what's behind you right now, as you had images on a green screen, right. Or you had a faux locker room setting, or you had a set back there. Mm-hmm. But if you go back, and if I go over there and pull out my Hulkamania 2 Coliseum video and pop it in on the Superstars of Wrestling, when Mr. Wonderful and Hulk Hogan are having words in the locker room about why did Hogan not answer the phone last week when Orndorff tried to call him to set up this tag match.
Yes,
I was in the gym, brother. I was in the middle of a rep. They were standing in front of wood paneling that was exactly like what was in my house at the time over in the family room. And you go back and watch that, and like they put no effort in those backstage segments at all. Like they were standing in front of wood paneling. You know, when they knocked down the Piper's Pit set, when he beat up Snuka, you can see they're just in this, you know, you see just a bare brick wall back there and everything. And then years later, they would never dream of something like that. So it's funny how it evolved.
So well said, man. And I'll tell you, there is not a 80s fan of, especially of wrestling, worth their salt that didn't want that Mr. Wonderful figure so that they could reenact. If they had Bundy and Stud and Wonderful and Hogan, as I did, they reenacted the turn over and over and over again, where Wonderful finally clears the ring after Bundy and Stud have their way, and he's like, "It's okay, Hulk, get up, it's all right," and then waffled him, as Heenan would say, with a clothesline, and then dropped him with a pile driver. That angle was, you know, nowadays people are like, well, there wasn't much nuance to that. You know, someone attacked Hogan and all of a sudden they're the bad guy, or someone has a Russian flag and they're the bad guy. It's like, I you know what, as a 6 to 10-year-old, I did not want Shakespearean acting. Thank you. I did not want complex plot lines that had multiple angles, or like years later where it's like, well, I hate Mr. Wonderful because he's with my girlfriend. Oh yeah, well, I hate Hogan because he was with my wife the previous one. No.
Yeah, like I remember so I'm 9 years old when that angle takes place. And ironically, I had just gotten my Mr. Wonderful figure like a week or two before, because I didn't have any tag teams. I'm like, all right, I've got Stud and Bundy, but I have no good guys to face them in a tag match. And then all of a sudden they make this tag match for Superstars. And I'm like, yes, I've got Hogan and Orndorff. Like, this is amazing. And I was floored. My jaw was on the floor when Orndorff turned on Hogan. I was like, what? Why? Yeah. No. But it's funny now. You go back and watch that now, and you're like, oh, they foreshadowed that to death. Like,
oh yeah, you could see it coming as soon as they came out. You know, Hogan, to take Jesse's side, being a prima donna, dives in front of Mr. Wonderful so the camera can get a good shot of him. You could see it coming, but that's one of the magic things of being a kid in the 80s, is that we didn't have the technology to look up everything, find out what was going to happen and why and whatnot. We could just enjoy the simplicity of things happening as they happened.
Exactly. And we're young, so our mind's not a Rolodex of, oh, I remember when they did that in 72 back in Mid-Atlantic, you know. Like,
exactly.
We didn't have now they couldn't do anything that I can't relate it to something I've seen. Like, oh, it's just like back when they did that in World Class in 86.
That's why WrestleMania 3's main event worked so well for our generation, because we were not old enough to remember Shea Stadium. We were
No
not
clue.
old enough to remember, the other dozen guys who slammed Andre the Giant. We didn't get the channel that had the Von Erich promotion on. Well, maybe you did, Gene. I didn't. That had the Von Erich promotion on at WCCW, where Kamala slammed Andre on TV.
I had it on ESPN, but it was after that had happened, so I didn't see that happen. So yeah, man. As far as I knew, these guys have always been best buddies. Hulk's always been a good guy.
Mm-hmm.
Andre's never been slammed. He's never been defeated in his entire life, and then come to find out, like, no, they not only have they wrestled in the WWF.
Mm-hmm. well, see, I had I'll admit I had just a slight edge on Eugene is that my dad bought the wrestling magazines. So I did see photos of Hogan and Andre against each other when Blassie managed Hogan. But even then, that didn't ruin the dynamic of the WrestleMania 3 match, because what scared me to death was that, for one thing, Andre was bad. What do you do when the friendly giant decides, now I'm a bad guy and I'm coming for you? And then, of course, sacrilege in our generation, you're now with Bobby the Brain Heenan. I would give anything to go back to that existence where my biggest concern and my biggest fear and the thing I lost sleep over the most was if Bobby Heenan and any member of the Heenan family ever got their hands on the World Wrestling Federation Championship, it would be the end of the entire world.
That's it. It was just shut it down. It's over with.
I mean, on ABC, they're promoting, okay, this week, Gorbachev and Reagan are going to be talking about arms dismemberment, which I understood that meant missiles and things, but I was more afraid of, but now Andre's a bad guy. If Heenan gets his hands on the WWF belt, the world's going to come to an end.
And if Hogan can't beat him, nobody can. He'll be champion forever, because if Hulk can't beat Andre, there's nobody that's going to beat Andre. What's Tito Santana going to beat him? I don't think so. That's not happening.
No insult to Tito, but yeah, and that, I think that's what made that main event so incredibly special, is that Andre had never been a bad guy before. So for our generation, we were scared. And then, as was said so perfectly in I think a Rivals documentary where Vince was like, so we had this incredible attraction known the world over who had never actually been pinned before. And now he's a bad guy. And he's decided, screw you, I want to be the champion. Who could possibly stop him? Well, maybe one guy. Right. And the way they built that, again, going back to how we enjoyed simplicity, it didn't have to have layers and layers of stuff. It was okay. We were friends, and now Andre's starting to get jealous because I've been champion for over 3 years.
And
his trophy,
I got a bigger trophy than he did. I love that aspect of it, and how drastically they weren't even close in size. Like, it's funny because a lot of those Hogan angles, when you go back and look at them now, you're like, that other guy almost kind of had a legitimate gripe most of the time. Like he was kind of a jerk to Orndorff.
Sure.
Andre did kind of get the shaft on that whole trophy deal, so I kind of get why he was upset. And then
it's funny when we get older, we look back at, I think that's one of the great successes of the Cobra Kai series, is that for years people started looking at it from Johnny's perspective, and it's like, actually Johnny's got some bones here.
Exactly. Because dude, when you go back and look at that highlight reel of all the times that Hogan snatched up Elizabeth throughout the Mega Powers, like, right. Okay, Savage has got a point here, man. I'm kind of Team Savage here years ago. Now back in '89, I was like, Savage, how dare you? But then years later, they had that perfect little highlight reel that took all those moments that was like that movie, The Usual Suspects. You're like, as they happened, they didn't seem like a big deal. But when you see it all in a row, you're like, holy crap, how did I not see this coming?
Yeah, that was an interesting rift in our household, because I mean, Dad and I were always Hulkamaniacs, but when Savage was like, I'm gonna present some footage, and it gets to the part where one of the times, like after the SummerSlam tag team main event match, where he places Elizabeth up on Randy's shoulders, Dad's like, he has his hand on her butt.
Exactly.
But Hulk said he doesn't feel about her that way. And he's like, well, what'd Hulk say? Well, Hulk said he thinks of her as a sister. You heard him. Yeah, but you don't put your hand on your sister's butt. There's something going on there. And it's like, oh man.
Like, and he calls everybody brother, so I don't really put much stock in him calling her sister.
That's a bad habit of mine because I mean, I had a friend who said my friend, but that sounds like, okay, I keep feet in jars in my basement. It's I don't know anyone that can say that in a way that sounds comfortable to me anyway. So
Yeah.
when I say brother, it's always meant from love, or in the case of my friends at the gym, I don't remember everyone's name.
Well, I think it suits, Smash Ventura. He's from the 80s. Of course he's going to say brother. I mean, what would he say?
Oh, God. Yeah,
dude, maybe.
I hope this doesn't turn into like a Barbara Walters special where you're like, okay, Smash, like, tell me top 5 things that Smash Ventura would say. And I'm like, brother, I can handle my capacity of ecto cooler, okay? I can do it. just
Exactly.
nonsense.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Give Me Back My Pro Wrestling, the podcast that's based on the old school but can still help you find the good stuff from today. Jimmy Street and the Plastic Chic, Jared, are the undisputed tag team champions of the wrestling podcast world. From thought-provoking topics to superstar interviews to action figure expertise. This team does it all, and all they ask is, give me back my pro wrestling! Every other Thursday, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hey, it's Bob Smith, and guess what? The Outdated Wrestling Hour is now part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. But hey, no fear, you're still going to hear the unique guests, comedy, music, authors, journalists, funny people. Who knows who's going to end up on the Outdated Wrestling Hour? Remember, it's all new and all old. So check it out in the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and wherever you get your podcasts. Listen if you know what's good for you.
So, what was your favorite WrestleMania of all time?
Oh, that's difficult. Could I like say 3?
You can.
Okay. Well, first off, I don't think WrestleMania 2 gets enough love. Now, the mistake they made there was splitting the show into 3 segments, but I enjoyed the Macho Man, Randy Savage, George Steele Intercontinental title match because I'd never seen anyone kick out of Macho Man's elbow before. He had to drop 2 of them on George and then put his feet on the ropes in order to beat him. So that had me on the edge of my seat. The Bundy Hogan match does not get enough love. And I might be alone on this, but a lot of people crap all over that match. And they're like, well, it was a big man fest. And it's like, I don't want to see Hulk Hogan and King Kong Bundy doing friggin' wrist locks and ankle locks and moonsaults and stuff. That was King Kong versus Godzilla inside the famed blue cage, baby. It was everything I wanted. Just 2 big powerhouses pounding the crap out of each other. So WrestleMania 2, I would say is one of my favorites. WrestleMania 3 for 2 reasons: Andre and Hogan, and of course Steamboat and Savage. Nobody could leave that out.
Yeah.
WrestleMania 6, even though I was not I liked Ultimate Warrior on his own, but when they put him against Hogan, it's like when he beat Hogan clean, it's like, okay, I cannot side with you now. But the build up for that match was exciting. They had never done something like that before. The promos, I know Warrior gets a lot of heat for the promos he did, but I liked comic books and Saturday morning cartoons. And so Warrior's promos to me were crazy, but entertaining. I mean, he's supposed to be talking about Hogan. Instead, he's like, and then you kick in the door of the cockpit and you grab the pilots who have made the ultimate sacrifice and you crash the plane into the mountainside. And I'm like, Dad, is he going to kill Hogan?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bunch of nonsense, but I mean, what's the Ultimate Warrior who runs to the ring and shake the ropes? Like, what's he going to talk about? He's not going to be all, cerebral like Jake the Snake. And, I mean, he had his own style, as crazy as it may have been.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, man. The Ultimate Warrior was like an explosion of emotion and color and just so his promos fit him, in my opinion, because you didn't know what you were going to get. You knew he was going to, as soon as the lights went down, all of a sudden you heard, dun, dun 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 dun. It's like, oh man, like just an explosion.
I mean, have you ever been more psyched when after he's held the belt forever in 3 days, Honky Tonk Man's out in the ring just talking all this smack at SummerSlam 88. Come on, I'll bring him on out here. I'll fight anybody. Come on. When Warriors music hit, everybody in Madison Square Garden lost their mind. And I would dare say everybody around the world, such as myself, in their living room shot up off the couch and went, he's fixing to get beat. He's finally getting beat. Oh, my God.
Man, you were so
awesome.
right on. And how many of us reenacted that moment with our pillow? Right? I mean, I reenacted that title change with my pillow over and over and over again. And
wow, we are really admitting. I thought I was admitting a dark secret that I watched old 80s commercials on YouTube, but I mean, I'm glad to hear I'm not the only one that's wrestling pillows when I was a kid, reenacting wrestling matches. And I'd get up on the back of our couch and dive halfway across the living room onto a pillow, and you'd hear me hit the floor. My parents come out of their back room like, "What are you doing?" Nothing.
Oh, I told you before we started filming, you want weird? Hold my high C, baby. I used to tie a towel around my neck and reenact the greatest American hero diving off the couch. But I could never get more than a couple of words of the first verse out before I hit the floor. Believe it or not. Ooh, coffee table.
Not.
It was such a great time to grow up in, man. And I love reliving it. It brings me to a centerpiece, and I love sharing that love with anyone who wants to go back and enjoy it. Because I mean, even for people that weren't there, it amazes me the amount of interest. But then again, I mean, growing up in the 80s, I had an interest in the pop culture of the 50s, starting thanks to Back to the Future's crossover between those two eras. There was a lot to enjoy about the 50s. And I also blame Nick at Night in the 80s for getting me interested in the 50s. I mean, Car 54, Donna Reed, My Three Sons, great stuff.
And I guess that's a big difference is like, all right, in the 80s, if you're fascinated with the 50s, how much was really out there to go and study, and if whatever was out there, how much access did you have to it?
Mm-hmm.
But like, there's a ton of stuff from the 80s you can watch, see, read, and study, and it's so easily accessible thanks to the internet. So it's a lot easier decade to relive. And
Right.
to circle back to something else real quick. I was glad to hear you give love to WrestleMania 2 because, like you said, that is definitely a forgotten WrestleMania. When I finally got a VCR in 1980, late 87, Christmas of 87. That's when I got it.
You're ahead of me by 4 years.
I got the first tapes I got was 4 wrestling tapes that were on sale at my local video store used, and my buddy helped my mom pick them out. I got the Great American Bash 1986. The Jake the Snake Roberts Coliseum video, where it ends with Kim Chi removing his mask on Saturday Night's Main Event to reveal the Honky Tonk Man.
Yes, that was epic.
The WWF Big Event from 86, Hogan and Orndorff.
Man.
And last but not least, WrestleMania 2.
Nice.
And I watched WrestleMania 2. I can't tell you how many times I watched those 4 tapes all together, but especially WrestleMania 2 and the having the NFL guys in the Battle Royal was wild. Right? I mean, come on, Chicago Bears, Super Bowl Shuffle. What a big thing that was for all of us.
Epic. Totally epic.
That was huge. But for me, for whatever reason, WrestleMania 3, I mean, okay, there's 40 WrestleManias. If they end up having 400 WrestleManias, WrestleMania 3 is always my favorite just because it was so big. Like, it just felt huge, that a huge crowd. And then to me at the time, being 10 years old, Hogan and Andre, a match you never thought you'd see. It was so memorable for Andre to turn heel. And then like say Savage and Steamboat after he nearly killed poor Steamboat. You didn't think he's ever going to talk again,
right?
Roddy Piper retiring, who I was a big fan of.
Wow.
Just a lot to like on that one. And so there's a lot of people that will argue and go, oh, if you go back and watch it now, that match is if you compare it to WrestleMania 22, and I'm like, I'm not even talking about match quality. It's like the way it makes me feel, that warm, fuzzy feeling I get when I go back and watch WrestleMania 3
Yes.
will never be replaced. But I do have love for 2, and as far as covers of VHS wrestling tapes go, that cover of WrestleMania 1 with the artist rendering of Hogan and Mr. T will always be a top 5 favorite of mine as well.
Nostalgia, man, it's a powerful thing. And you mentioned out of the tapes there, the big event. We got so used to, especially when we got to the Hogan 86 belt, seeing Hulk with the belt, that it freaked me out when Mr. Wonderful put the belt on. People of our generation that followed wrestling as we did will understand when I say that it was like a bizarro world. Mr. Wonderful is wearing the Hulk Hogan belt. And I felt a little bit guilty because part of me was like, he actually looks good on him. But then I'm like, no, he can't end Hulkamania. No.
So in a WWF magazine, 2 or 3 months after that, when they had coverage of the big event, there was a fairly large picture in there of Orndorff wearing the WWF belt. And my buddy that was a few years older than me, who had grown out of Hulk before any of me and my other friends did, yeah, he cut that picture out and hung it up of Orndorff for the WWF title, and did that just to annoy us. Like, that's the champ right there. That's the uncrowned champ. Like, how dare you hang that on the wall? Take that down. Like, nope, that's the champ. He'll get it soon enough. And I always thought that was funny. But like you said, it suited him. I wouldn't admit that then, but years later, I'm like, that's a pretty cool picture, actually. And who knows what the world would have became if Mr. Wonderful had been WWF champion. It could have changed everything.
I know a lot of people were like, well, Hogan, that first run was too long. But for me, it's like, and I speak of me then, it's like, no, 4 years was good. It was everything we wanted, everything we needed. And by the time they did decide to change it up, it felt, in hindsight, right at that time to change it up.
Yeah, I think so. If it had been, passing the belt back and forth, and of course, Lord, when they did it in '88 with the twin refereeing, I was like, my gosh, if you're gonna have to do everything but run over Hogan with a tank to get the belt off of him.
But what was great about that, I might be alone on that, but I did not see that coming. The way they built that up, I was suspicious that they were going to do something. I had no idea, and I'll tell you, little Smash was 5 inches from that TV screen when Hulk was looking at the 2 referees, and McMahon was going, "They're identical, Jesse! Identical! Oh, come on, McMahon, he just did the match!" It's like, wow!
That response was cynical me years later. Now, at the time, I'm like screaming at the TV, his shoulder is up! His shoulder's up!
What? God! Oh,
and then how much was the plastic surgery, brother? And I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy got plastic surgery to look like Dave Hebner. Oh, and then I'm like, years later, I'm like, oh yeah, I do remember there being another Hebner on the NWA.
Yes. Now, see, folks. Now, see, folks. People like Gene and I, because I agree. A year or so later, I'm like, wait a minute. I remember a Hebner in the NWA. So I start pulling out my old Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazines, and I'm like, there he is refereeing Magnum TA versus Ric Flair. And I'm like, oh, okay. Which brings me to a question I wanted to ask you, Gene. Now, being from your part of the world now, were you NWA first and then later WWF, or?
So
not to put you on the spot.
It's hard to say because my dad watched wrestling. He wasn't like, if he saw it on, he would watch it, but it wasn't like appointment television for him. But like, I can remember being in the room playing with my trucks and cars or action figures or something, and be like, "Hey, wrestling's on." I'm like, "Yeah, whatever." And eventually, one of the first things that he pointed out, and I stopped what I was doing. I started watching it, was the Road Warriors in there just destroying somebody on a Saturday night. Then I can remember being enthralled with Jake putting Damien on somebody. I'm like, okay.
Nice.
This is interesting.
So those are like your initial memories of.
So those are some of my earliest memories of when I started paying attention, and then I started watching like Memphis wrestling and then Continental wrestling.
Oh, nice.
And so those two shows came close enough that we could actually go to shows and see them. So the first live event I ever went to was a Continental show in Columbus, Mississippi.
Wow.
I got to see, Buddy Landell and Dutch Mantell, the Nightmares, and Wildcat Wendell Cooley, and all these guys. And then eventually I got to go to a Memphis show in Tupelo. Got to see Jerry Lawler, Bill Dundee. And so I always had a deeper love for those promotions because I felt a little more connected to them because I got to actually go see them. I got to meet these guys and get signed pictures of them and stuff. But to me, so at that point in 86, I lock in and it's like, if wrestling is on, I will be watching it. And if there's a wrestling magazine in the store and I can talk my parents into getting it, I will own it. And I was all in on wrestling. I didn't care about any other sports. I can't tell you how many times throughout my life my mom would go, Gene, there's more to life in wrestling. Or she'd want to go somewhere on a Saturday and be like, all right, well, we can go. But look, we're either going to have to go super early and be back by 11 before Memphis Wrestling comes on.
Right.
Or we can go right after Memphis Wrestling at 12:30, but we got to be back before 5:05 before World Championship Wrestling comes on. And then we can leave at 7:05, but then we got to be back before 10 because Continental comes on. And then sometimes I had to flip back and forth between Continental and Saturday night's main event, which was really tugged at your heartstrings there. Which one to? Oh my gosh, Dutch Mantell's bullwhipping Wendell Cooley over here, but Hulk Hogan's about to wrestle, whoever. So, so I really can't say. To me, I didn't distinguish good wrestling or bad wrestling, or this one's my favorite over the other. I liked them all kind of equally. Now, people would beat me with a stick for saying this now, but just me and you talking here, Smash. Hopefully, nobody's still watching at this point. They've already checked out. I thought NWA wrestling was kind of boring at that point. Those long Ric Flair matches, wasn't a fan. I loved watching the Saturday night shows and hearing Dusty Rhodes talk about Funky Like a Monkey and hearing the Road Warriors yell and go in there and destroy people. But as far as renting the cassette tapes when they came out, when this Ric Flair match was started, I'd be like, all right, let me go get my action figures. This is going to take forever, and it's probably going to be a draw, or the Four Horsemen are going to run in. So who cares? So in that aspect, I leaned more towards the WWF, and this is something else that's considered sacrilegious, and I probably shouldn't say this out loud because people are going to take away my wrestling fan card.
Come on.
But I didn't learn to really appreciate the Macho Man Ricky Steamboat match until probably 15 years later. When I rented the tape, I was like, oh, geez, this match is still going. Oh.
Okay. Yeah, no.
I was all about the Hogan match and the Piper match, to be quite honest. And so I told one of my best friends that like a few years ago that he's one of my best friends now. I mean, I met him on the internet. I didn't know him when we were kids, and we're about the same age. And he was carrying on about how, that was always my favorite match. I said, can I tell you something and you not hate me? And he's like, well, I was like, dude, I didn't even like that match as a kid. And he's like, I question everything I've ever thought I've known about you, dude. Like that's he's like, don't ever say that out loud to anyone ever again. Don't say that.
No, it's totally fine, man. In fact, the NWA indirectly made me appreciate the Steamboat Savage match when it happened, because much like you just shared, when I got into wrestling, I came in around just before WrestleMania 1, which was perfect timing. Because they had just, they just started doing the figures and the cartoon and then the thing with MTV. So I came in at a good time. And at that short window, I thought WWF was the only wrestling. I was not aware of other promotions until my dad started getting the Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazines. And the first time I saw a picture of the Road Warriors, I was like, I don't know who they are, but I like them just on sight. Now, NWA is interesting because I didn't actually discover them directly viewing. I started knowing of Flair and the Horsemen and Nikita and Lex Luger and those guys through the magazines, but I hadn't had an opportunity to see them on TV until cable finally came to Rutland, Vermont. And it was like if you go into an Amish land and bring a light bulb. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it's like, wait, you can actually see the TV? I was an expert at watching TV through snow and deciphering what was going on. But so cable came, and we could afford basic cable at the time. And I'm flipping through the channels on a Saturday afternoon, and all of a sudden I come across this other wrestling, and I'm like, wait, what? Oh, these are the guys from the magazine. Well, instantly I was hooked because I happened to land on the channel when Nikita Koloff had beat Tully Blanchard for the TV title.
Oh,
So,
nice.
yeah, I mean, I land on there and I'm like, wait a minute, these are two superstars and they're having a title match on free TV. And that, it was like the opposite of the Hogan style of promoting. You take the one good guy and he has the belt for a while and he's always fighting the world. I get
Mhm.
on WTBS and I see this great match where Nikita Koloff wins the TV title, but then it cuts to the Horsemen and they all come out with all these other belts and they're bragging. I'm like, wait a minute, the bad guys have all the titles? What's going on here? I was fascinated.
Yeah.
So I was like for a long time equally hooked to both, and I recognized that the two styles were different. But I was, on the one hand, I liked the explosive, cartoony, bam, 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 bam. But on the other hand, watching the NWA, that Koloff Blanchard match hooked me because I saw a good portion, if not 75% of that match, and I had no idea where it was going to go, who was going to win, but I was on the edge of my seat the whole time. And when Nikita won, I cried.
Wow.
And I unfortunately I didn't discover the other promotions until a year or so later when I realized, okay, there's a promotion in Texas and we got ESPN and it's like, okay, this is cool. And then I started becoming aware of Memphis and whatnot. But yeah, no, so we were renting tapes of other promotions and there was a best of AWA tape with the Road Warriors and watching them destroy people. I mean, they'd announce gorgeous Jimmy Garvin and Mr. Electricity, Steve Regal, and Precious would be in there spraying the ring and whatnot. And then all of a sudden everyone would start getting up on their chairs and the first few bars of Iron Man would come on and they would storm the ring. Holy moly. I mean, what a glorious time to be alive.
Man, has there ever been a better theme song for anybody than the Road Warriors coming out to Iron Man? I mean, just absolutely perfection. Yeah, man, that's good stuff. That is, man. And
I went a little long, brother. I'm sorry.
No, it's all good. I love hearing that. I love finding out where like certain fandoms where you can root it to, because it took me a little while to really kind of remember, because I've become like the Memphis guy in these circles. Like I do 2 or 3 different Memphis podcasts and everything, and so
awesome.
That's kind of who I am these days. But I still have a lot of love for all the other stuff I grew up watching. And I've got another review show that I do here on YouTube. Well, the show you're on right now, this Retro Wrestling, is kind of a catch-all. Sometimes I do interviews. Sometimes I do reviews of shows that's like, so on my USWA show, we go through, like right now we're in 1993 and we watch each week's show and me and my 2 buddies review it and show clips and screenshots. And then we talk about it, and some of it's good and some of it's bad. So, we put over the good stuff and we have some fun with the bad stuff, and then it is what it is, And
awesome.
So I love doing that. But then again, I'm like, I like other wrestling too. So I've started here on the Retro Wrestling channel. I'll do interviews like we're doing tonight. And like I had Jeremiah Plunkett on recently, and we kind of talked about the history of the NWA Mid-America title he won a couple of months ago.
That was
but in other times, like I had Tyler Peters on, and me and him reviewed a Smoky Mountain Wrestling event that he chose. And next week, me and my buddy Bob are reviewing a random Global Wrestling Federation event or TV show.
Loved Global.
So, man, me and you are on the same wavelength. So, dude, anytime that you have the time or want to come on and us review a show, I mean, you take your pick of anything you want. It's got to be something we can show some clips of. Now, as far as just anything, I've got a Patreon. We can watch anything on Patreon. So, you want to go watch some old NWA, WWF, we can watch anything you want. We can do a watch along over there. Just actually watch it and talk over it. But
I'd be honored.
Man, I would love to have you on as a frequent guest for us to go back and review some good old 80s shows, man. We can show some clips and talk about it, break it down, and analyze it. And I gotta
be careful, man. You're so good at this. I might be out of a job.
No, man, you're doing the Lord's work over there. Man, putting those shows together, like recreating channels, and especially starting with Nick at Night. I mean, hey, I can remember. So you have to be like me. Then you have to remember I don't know, it depends on when you got cable. But when we first got cable, which would have been probably 84, 5, somewhere in there.
Okay.
Nickelodeon was on during the day.
Nickelodeon. Now I'm with you on that because we didn't get it till 88, but I saw it at my grandmother's house from 84 on.
Okay, so you didn't experience this then. So in 84 or 85-ish, I think it was. Maybe it was 83. I don't know. My timelines are terrible. If I can't relate it directly to wrestling, I can't put timestamps on anything.
Okay.
But in the early 80s, when we got cable and we got Nickelodeon added to our cable, Nickelodeon would play until about 5 or 6 p.m. and Nickelodeon would end its day.
Yes.
And it would turn into A&E Arts and Entertainment.
That was so
A&E
weird.
wasn't its own separate channel then. It picked up where Nickelodeon left off.
It was
so
weird.
As soon as I got done watching the last episode of You Can't Do That on Television or Mr. Wizard or whatever it was I was watching, A&E would come on. I was like, well, what's this garbage? And I'd change the channel. And then eventually they started talking about coming soon, Nick at Night. And they were My Three Sons and Route 66 and Car 54, Where Are You? And the Donna Reed Show and all this stuff.
I got to jump in on you
when it started.
I got to jump in on you. This is going to make you very happy. So in my madness of tracking down as many Nick at Night bumpers, IDs, and promos, you'll be happy to know, my dear new brother of the 80s, that I have even the earliest version of Nick at Night promos when it was called Summer Camp.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And I don't know why it was called Summer Camp, but the opening ID would be the Donna Reed people on a bus and the Bugler. And I have a bunch of Route 66 promos. And in fact, there's one where Tor Johnson's actually in an episode of Route 66. And in the promo, they show him throwing Bill Cosby down a bar. and it's like, that is Tor Johnson, no doubt.
Yeah. Wow.
But the depths of the promos that I've been collecting for probably at least a decade and a half now, I scour everywhere, and I dare say I might have probably the deepest collection. I'm going to try on my channel like a mock 1988 lineup of Nick at Night with the promos in the right spot and the commercials of that time in the right spot. And
love it.
But yeah, I got stuff as far back as when Nick at Night was founded. Even the promo going, Nickelodeon at 6 at night goes off the air. Everything goes drab. And they're showing these great cut scenes and whatnot from old stuff. But not if you call your cable company and say, I gotta have Nick at Night. It's like,
I remember that. And Eddie's promos, when the moon is shining bright, Nickelodeon presents Nick at Night.
Got it.
That's when those started coming on. Oh, that's awesome, dude. Yeah, I can't wait to check some of that out. That's
we should do a watch along together on your channel where brother, I'll bring the receipts. We could just make some popcorn and you pop them in wherever you want. We'll watch them.
Heck yeah. Heck yeah. I like it. Well, man, it's been a blast. It's flown by. I can't believe we're almost an hour and a half into this, and usually these things last about an hour. So
sorry,
except for me and Tyler Peters get talking about Smoky Mountain. I think we went 2 hours.
Well, I kept telling myself. I kept telling myself now, Smash, it's not your show. You're a guest. So remember, don't take over.
No, man, it's been a lot of fun. I appreciate you doing this. And like I say, man, anytime you're free, would love to have you back again. And this has been great. And it's great to make a new friend that is that gets all this, man.
Yes.
Some people, some of my friends are all different age ranges, and I'll talk to them about this kind of stuff, and they're just like, yeah, oh, that's cool. Give you the old dreaded head nod with that's cool. And I'm like, all right, it's totally not cool apparently. But I could tell me and you, we weren't acting there. We're on the same wavelength. So that's awesome, man.
We got a kinship, man. Now is this the obligatory spot of the show where I plug my gimmicks?
You're reading my mind. I was just about to say, then you know what time it is. It's time to tell everybody where they can find you and all your wares.
First off, the easiest spot on the internet is my website, officialsmashventura.card.co. That's officialsmashventura.card.co. And that links to everything I'm doing. But more specifically, you can find We're Living in the 1980s on YouTube, which features Smash Ventura TV. That's was a weekly show, but now it's a monthly show. I've also started putting in a little gaming content with my Video Game Federation VCW, which is, imagine Smash Ventura running a wrestling promotion with his own characters. Yeah.
Awesome.
We're also going to be trying some Nick at Night stuff on there, and also the flagship. This is how, whatever name I built online, thanks to all of you, this is the flagship. We're Living in the 1980s, the radio show, which you can find on star1079.com. That's star1079.com. Every Sunday night at 8 p.m. Eastern.
And I will try to make sure to put those links in the description of both this YouTube channel, and as well, this will be on Spotify and Apple and everywhere people enjoy podcasts, as they say. So we'll put those links out there. That way, we need some more people to find you. We need some more people to join us living in the 1980s, because it's pretty fun there, ain't it?
Oh yeah. I as I always tell people, it's like everyone's welcome in my time machine. Take a break from all the crazy stuff going on in the world. Join me for an hour on YouTube or 3 hours every Sunday night, and know that everyone's welcome to a bowl of ET cereal, a big jug of Ecto Cooler, and we're gonna have fun, and it's gonna be a good time. When you're with the pink-haired rocker of 80s nostalgia, it's safe.
The neon icon himself, folks. Smash Ventura. Smash, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. It's been a blast. We will talk to you again soon. And thank you all for checking out another episode of Retro Wrestling.
Hi, this is Mike Needham, host of the Reckless Abandon Podcast with Mike Needham. We invite you to jump on your favorite podcast platform and search for the Reckless Abandon Podcast and give us a listen. I'm sometimes joined by a part-time podcaster, part-time co-host, and full-time wife, Tiffany Nicole. And when you get the wife on there, sometimes that can lead to some very interesting conversation. We talk wrestling, we talk pop culture, we talk local events in West Tennessee, local happenings in West Tennessee, and a ton of other stuff. I would like to tell you that this is a show about nothing, but Seinfeld already has that copyrighted, so I cannot tell you that our podcast is a show about nothing. But be sure to check out the Reckless Abandon Podcast. Find us on Facebook. Also, look up the Microgroup Podcasting family on Facebook and see some of our other podcasts we have out there. Until next time, make good choices, and always remember, no dollar, no dice.
This is Wrestling Nostalgia, the podcast that dives into wrestling history. Hey, wrestling fans, I'm Dave Dynasty, and if you enjoy podcasts that are knowledgeable and history-driven, then Wrestling Nostalgia is for you. With great guests and fun interviews, there are over 200 episodes in our archives. We chat with several first-time guests and often cover topics not discussed on other podcasts. Look up Wrestling Nostalgia on your favorite podcast platform and visit all of our links at linktree/wrestlepod. That is linktr.ee/RASSLEPOD. And remember, wherever you go, whatever you do, be good, be safe, and keep on growing.